Welcome to the Randy Report. I'm Randy Slavacek, your host. I'm also the writer and editor of therandyreport.com, where you can find me every single day on the internet reporting on the daily news cycle in terms of politics, pop culture, and entertainment news of interest to the LGBTQ community and its allies. In this week's headlines, Donald Trump has ordered serial liar and former gay Republican Congressman George Santos released from prison. The Texas City of Arlington is considering repealing its own local anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ residents. Lawmakers in Turkey are considering updating laws negatively impacting the LGBTQ community. All that and more in this episode of The Randy Report. Late Friday this week, President Donald Trump announced he had commuted the prison sentence of gay serial liar and disgraced former Republican Congressman George Santos, ordering his immediate release. Santos was sentenced to 7 years in prison in April after pleading guilty to wire fraud, deceiving campaign donors, and misappropriating the identities of 11 people, including family members, to fund his political efforts. He also copped to lying to Congress, stealing money from campaign donors, and fraudulently collecting unemployment benefits. All in all, Santos pleaded guilty to 23 felony counts. But then you can imagine that Donald Trump, who was found guilty of 34 felony counts of fraud in a New York court, would feel some kinship with Santos. On July 25th this summer, Santos began his prison sentence reporting to the Federal Correctional Institution in Fairton, New Jersey, a minimum security camp with fewer than 50 inmates. He's now free after serving less than 3 months. Trump's clemency grant not only ordered his immediate release, but also let Santos off the hook for any, quote, further fines, restitution, probation, supervised release, or other conditions, end quote. Now, as part of his plea deal, Santos had agreed to pay nearly $600,000 in fines and restitution to the people he stole from. Thanks, Trump. After observing oral arguments at the Supreme Court last week, many legal experts feel that the High Court appears set to reject Colorado's state law prohibiting the harmful practice of so-called conversion therapy, also known as reparative therapy, for minors, which attempts to change a young person's sexuality or gender identity. Colorado's minor conversion therapy law, passed in 2019, bans licensed physicians or registered mental health care providers from attempting to change, quote, behaviors or gender expressions or to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attraction or feelings towards individuals of the same sex, end quote, in minors. Kaylee Childs is a licensed therapist and an evangelical Christian who says she wants to help teens regarding their sexual orientation and gender dysphoria. She says the state's ban violates her First Amendment right of free speech, even though she's never been asked to practice conversion therapy on a minor patient, and she wants the law struck down. Childs is being represented by the anti-LGBTQ hate group Alliance Defending Freedom. Just to give you an example, in 2003, Alliance Defending Freedom petitioned the Supreme Court to keep homosexuality criminalized. Now, some right-wing religious groups promote the concept that an individual can change their sexual orientation or gender identity through so-called conversion therapy, as a means to underscore their belief that being gay is a choice. And if so, the gays could just stop their sinful ways if they wanted to. #wrong. Lawyers for Colorado argue that the Supreme Court long has held states can regulate the professional conduct of medicine to safeguard patients from substandard care, even if the rules impinge on speech. Folks, being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, or queer in any way is not a disease. It's not something that a therapist should be trying to fix. numerous studies have found that so-called conversion therapy is unsafe and ineffective and leads to higher rates of attempted suicide among LGBTQ youth, self-esteem issues, and increased depression. The dangerous practice has been rejected by every mainstream medical and mental health organization for decades, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychiatric Association. This case could have broad impact, possibly setting the stage to strike down similar laws in about 30 states. Historically, the Supreme Court issues its high-level rulings in June, so we could be waiting until summer to find out how this goes. The City Council of Arlington, Texas, has delayed a decision on whether to remove protections for LGBTQ residents from the city's anti-discrimination ordinance. The City Council had planned on voting on the issue this week, but chose to postpone it to its November 18th meeting after dozens of residents lined up at this week's meeting to oppose the change. Mayor Jim Ross said the city needs more time to seek legal counsel and understand the proposed changes. What are those changes? Well, city staff has proposed removing sexual orientation and gender identity and expression from the local anti-discrimination ordinance. That means the city would no longer handle complaints from LGBTQ residents who say they face discrimination in housing, employment, or other public accommodations. The reason for all this? Well, city officials say Arlington risks losing $65 million in federal funding if it doesn't amend the ordinance, citing President Donald Trump's pledge to withhold federal funding from cities with diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, programs. If approved, Arlington, which has a population of about 400,000, would be one of the first cities in the country to repeal its anti-discrimination protections for LGBTQ residents. As I've reported many times in the past, Texas Republican lawmakers have tried for years to enact a blanket, statewide ban on local LGBTQ protections passed by cities and counties. But now, Trump is doing it for them. Turkey's government has revealed the draft of its 11th judicial reform package, which includes a series of updated laws negatively affecting the LGBTQ community, including threatening prison time for transgender people and same-sex couples. The judicial reform package is the latest collection of proposed legal changes that the Turkish government presents to Parliament for consideration. The country has experienced a rise in anti-LGBTQ rhetoric since President Erdogan took office in 2014, banning pride marches just 1 year into his position. Now observers say that the proposals reflect conservative priorities and introduce significant legal restrictions. Under the new draft, anyone who publicly promotes behaviors or identities that are not deemed true to their sex given at birth, in other words, transgender people, could face 1 to 3 years in prison. Same-sex couples caught holding engagement or wedding ceremonies, even in private, could also face prison sentences of 1.5 to 4 years. Maximum penalties for public sexual acts or exhibitionism have been proposed to increase from 1 year to 3 years. The proposed reforms also include raising the minimum legal age for gender reassignment surgeries from 18 to 25 years old. Applicants would be required to be unmarried, provide a medical board report confirming the procedure's psychological necessity, and undergo 4 separate evaluations spaced at least 3 months apart before even undergoing the procedure. Performing surgeries outside that legal framework could result in 3 to 7 years in prison and fines. Government officials in Turkey justify the reforms as necessary to their motto, quote, protect families, promote healthy development, and preserve social order, end quote. This one really gets to me as a news guy. NBC News has laid off about 150 employees and dissolved its dedicated editorial teams covering Black, Latino, Asian American, and LGBTQ communities. Executives described the decision as an efficiency measure to streamline operations across NBC Universal's news division. But it also dismantles the network's identity-based teams, also known as verticals, including NBC OUT, NBC Latino, NBC Asian American, and NBC BLK. NBC News says that while some of the roles were eliminated, its specialized reporting units will continue operating and drawing on contributions from the wider newsroom. However, critics warned that such integration often results in fewer stories and diminished focus on marginalized voices. Launched in 2016, NBC OUT was the first major broadcast vertical devoted to LGBTQ issues and helped bring national attention to queer lives beyond Pride Month. Similarly, NBC BLK, NBC Latino, and NBC Asian American provided nuanced reporting on race, culture, and representation that rarely appeared elsewhere in network news. NBC OUT most recently received a GLAAD Media Award for its excellent reporting on the death of Oklahoma trans student Nex Benedict. These layoffs actually reflect a broader contraction in U.S. media, where outlets are cutting diversity and identity desks amid economic strain and political backlash against DEI programs. And that brings me to the end of this episode of The Randy Report. If you enjoy catching up on LGBTQ news in a quick podcast, I'd appreciate it if you'd share it with your friends. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss an episode. I like to think of The Randy Report as the 60 minutes of gay news, only shorter. And remember, you can find me every single day on the internet at therandyreport.com, where I cover the daily news cycle in terms of politics, pop culture, and entertainment news of interest to the LGBTQ community and its allies. Thanks for listening, folks. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.